So there are basically two types of transport. There's this passive transport and another is active transport. In passive transport, it's further divided into diffusion. Let's go one by one. Diffusion, which means diffusion is a process by which molecules move from a higher concentration to lower concentration. It usually happens with gas. You can relate it with, for example, a person in bicycle is moving from a higher uphill area to a low hill area, so that would be easier for him to do so. Yes, he doesn't need any energy to do it. Osmosis is also a kind of passive transport. Osmosis is diffusion of water molecules across the selectively permeable membrane. What's implying the selectively permeable membrane here is the cell membrane or the plasma membrane that we are seeing in here. An experiment that you can do with osmosis is take some raisins in a glass of water and let it stay overnight. You'll see the raisins swell up. That's osmosis. These raisins did not use any energy and they took in water. So that's osmosis. Another passive transport is facilitated diffusion. This can be related with water spout. For example, it's raining, and when it rains, there's water in our roof. For it to come down, we need a water spout so that the water can be facilitated in this specific area. So it's similar to the water spout. The protein channel that you're seeing in here is working like that water spout. And the molecules that cross through protein channel are the sugar. Even these sugar, they don't use any energy, but they need a protein channel to cross through the cell. Now let's move on to active transport. These are examples of active transport. Here in active transport, there is a need for energy. Unlike the passive transport, active transport needs energy for molecules to pass through the cell. Active transport means sometimes in certain cases molecules have to move from area of lower concentration to higher concentration. In order to do so, they require energy. So basically it's the opposite of diffusion that we learned here. Here imagine that you're riding your bicycle from downhill to uphill. That would require energy. Yes, so it's same with the molecules. These molecules, they feel like they are traveling from somewhere in low area to a higher concentration area. So for the molecules to do so, they need energy. That's active transport. Which are the molecules that move through the cell through active transport? Examples would be calcium, potassium, and sodium. So that's what we just saw. The liquid and the gas can move through the cell without the use of energy. That concept is called selective permeability. Moving on to larger particles. All that we learn now is smaller particles. It's smaller particles like calcium and sodium. But here we are going to talk about larger particles. For example, food particles. How do bigger particles like food cross in and out of the cell? So this is a little different than the active and passive transport. In here, what happens is the cell membrane takes particles into the cell by changing its shape. Can you see that? That's a cell membrane, okay? So for it to take in this food particle, it has to change its shape. Basically, it creates a small opening in here and then engulfs the food particle. Once the food particle is swallowed, the cell membrane fuses, like how you see in here, and pinches off a vacuole surrounding the particle. So it takes in, while doing so, it also creates this vacuole that you see around the food particle. This is endocytosis because the cell membrane is taking in the food particle. So it's inside endocytosis. The opposite is called exocytosis, wherein the cell membrane has to let some of the food particles get out of the cell. When the food particles leave the cell, a vacuole is formed around it and fuses to the cell membrane, forcing the contents out of the cell. This is called exocytosis. Exo, like exit. That's exocytosis. So now let's move on to the next slide. We are going to talk about cell division. When do you think cell division or replication would be necessary? When there is some damage to already existing cell. For example, a person falls down and he breaks his bone. So in here he needs cells to replicate for him to heal. body will immediately begin repairing process. Remember, cells can only produce cells. The new cells will come from older cells that divide in two over and over again until there are enough healthy cells to restore full function. Similarly, cell divisions can replace aging cells and those that die from diseases. That and those that die from disease. So, let's see how cells divide. There is this one cell that you see in here. For it to replicate, what it does is it basically elongates in its shape. While it's elongating, it also creates a replica of its chromosomes. Here you can see that there is just one chromosome inside. When it elongates, it creates a replica of it. So after that, what happens is there is a septum formation. Basically, the cell membrane is that's surrounding the cell is pinching off. And the cell pinches into two. And also there is a septum formation in here. So that creates two cells. Now that there are two cells, each one can create two more. Yes, so that will be four cells. And from four, it will be eight, and it goes on. Cell divisions allow organisms to grow larger. A tiny fertilized egg splits into two, two into four, and so on, until a single cell becomes a multicellular organism. Another function of cell division is reproduction. It leads to the growth of new structures. Why cell division is important? Because this simple cell called a stem cell is what creates different kinds of cells like gut cells, liver cells, heart cells, nerve cells, blood cells, and muscle cells. One single nerve cell divide, and when it multiplies, it creates one organ. That's the brain. A muscle cell can multiply to create a muscle. An intestinal cell can multiply to create intestines. A hepatocyte cells can multiply to create liver. This is how, there is a grammatical mistake in here. This is how babies are formed. They start as a single cell, and in 40 weeks, one single cell replicates to create this entire baby. So now that we have learned about different types of cells, that's the prokaryotic and eukaryotic, there are structures. We learned that they're of different structures. Yes, the fungi cells are different structured, and the plant cells and the animal cells, each one has a distinct structure to it. And then we learned about the components inside, like we learned about all the organelles like nucleus, nucleolus, ribosomes, vesicles, vacuoles, chloroplast, and mitochondria, Golgi complex, all those. And we also learned about their functions, like Golgi complex is responsible for sending the protein to specific area, and ribosomes produce those proteins. So you can go through all these in the previous video. And then we also learned about how materials are getting transferred, which we learned in this video about active transport, passive transport. And we also learned about how exocytosis and endocytosis occurs. And we also learned how cells replicate by them. But where do they get their energy from? We know all living things need energy, yes? Where does the energy start from? Even for the mitochondria to get energy, where does it get it from? Everything starts with the sun energy. That's what gives energy to the entire earth. So this sun energy is taken in by the plants. They convert the light energy to food energy, which is taken in by the animals. And animals can give us meat and milk, which we can consume, or we can consume the plant, that's the vegetables. So without this plant, this step would never occur. We human beings, we learn that we are autotrophs. We cannot create our own food. It's the plants that help convert the sun energy into a food energy. Sun energy would be useless without plants. They are what converts sun energy to food energy through the process called photosynthesis. And let's learn a little bit about photosynthesis. So these plants, they take in sunlight, they take in carbon dioxide and water from the ground, and they convert it to oxygen and sugars. So let's learn the formula for this process, this photosynthesis process. As a 7th grader, we should know this formula. We should be able to write this formula. 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules. When they combine, they create one sugar molecule, that's one sugar molecule, and 6 oxygen molecules. These are chloroplasts. They take in the sunlight, the water, the carbon dioxide, and convert it to oxygen and sugar. This is basically repeating the same process that we learned in the previous slide, but this slide is to just basically show that all this is happening inside chloroplast. Next, moving on to cellular respiration. Why are we learning about cellular respiration? It's about how we animals get energy. We learned about how plants got energy, yes? Now, in this slide, we are going to learn about how we derive energy from the plants. Stage 1, in the cytoplasm. Remember we learned about cytoplasm? This is the cytoplasm all over. It's all over the cell, yes? Cytoplasm is where all the organelles like Golgi complex, mitochondria are arranged, yes? So, in the cytoplasm, glucose is broken down into smaller molecules and a little bit of energy. And then what happens is, these smaller molecules that are derived from glucose are taken in by the mitochondria. And these mitochondria, they take in these smaller molecules that we got from glucose and the oxygen that we breathe in. They take in both of these, and there's some process going on in here, and they release what? Carbon dioxide that we breathe out, water that goes out of our body in the form of urine, and energy that we use to do our daily, that we use. The end.